Welcome to the Fireside Chat, the modern CISO, proactive security leading through influence and empathy. I'm Andrew Krug, and I'm actually going to be moderating this session with our fantastic guests, who I will let actually introduce themselves. Customers first, of course.
Absolutely. So my name's Ami Dave. I am the Chief Information Security Officer for Fanatics Betting and Gaming. I've been with the company for a little bit over 2 years, and my responsibilities are overseeing and managing the information security program and team.
Yeah, thank you for being with us. I'm Emilio, CISO of Datadog. Been with Datadog for about 4 years almost. Similar, managing security, and we're going to talk a little bit more about other responsibilities for the CISO as well, but like IT, SRE, and things like that. But thank you all for attending.
Yeah, so obviously we're here to talk about what it's like to be a CISO in modern application environments today. I think it's actually probably one of the toughest jobs in the world right now, but that's just coming from a security background. Just curious, how many people in the room would actually identify as being in a security role today primarily? And how many people do we have from engineering?
Wow.
And other leadership? All right, so hopefully we're all going to learn some things about what it's like to be a CISO. So obviously there are a lot of challenges in being, and if you don't know what CISO is, by the way, we'll play the acronym game where I have to put a dollar in the jar every time I use an acronym and don't tell you what it is. Chief Information Security Officer, but this also probably applies to BISOs, which is a relatively new role, Business Information Security Officer, Chief Security Officers. It's a tough job, right? And I think that's largely because CISOs have to be kind of a little bit of a Swiss Army knife. So for most of you that are in roles, your role is probably relatively specialized, and you know your role very well, but you're not required to know a ton about the other parts of the business. So I'm curious to hear from each of you on what are really the domains that you're responsible for besides security?
Yeah, you want to go ahead?
Yeah, sure. So with being a CISO, you wear multiple hats, right? And it's really dependent on the industry you work for. So in my previous role, I was in life insurance, and we were very much compliance driven, but I also had privacy I was overseeing. So wearing multiple hats outside of security is evolving, and you just have to adapt to that. In my current role, it's multiple functions. You have third party risk, you have engineering and GRC and many other functions as well. But I would say it's evolving. You have to wear multiple hats, and it's really dependent on what industry you work for.
Yeah, I think what's interesting about the discipline and the role is kind of like what Andrew was saying, right? Like you have certain roles that are special, like a CFO manages finance, right? And us as CISOs, like we have to oversee the information risk or the technical risk of the company. So we have to learn about those different departments, what makes finance tick, what makes legal tick, what makes HR tick. And then there's a layer of operations underneath that, like privacy being one of them, where like at Datadog, for example, the technical part of privacy reports in my org, the legal part of privacy obviously reports to the general counsel. So her and I are good peers and work a lot closer together, but you have to learn about that. And then not just a technical risk, but then compliance on top of that, right? If you're offering services like us, right, offering services to customers are going to ask Datadog to have certain compliance levels, whereas a CISO, you have to be able to know what they are and speak to them. I am not a compliance person, I'm an engineer, so I've had to learn all those things. But like I mentioned, knowing how a people department works, what systems do they have. I also oversee IT, so then I have to also think about it from an IT perspective. So the role itself is evolving, and I don't think it's fully defined yet. It has different reporting lines depending on what industry you're in as well, so it doesn't always report to the CTO or the CIO or the CEO or what have you. And then it's a role that is also expected to, for public companies in particular, sit in front of the board and talk about corporate risk and business risk. So you have to have that language as well. So you need to go deeply technical if you're working for a technical company, and then you have to go very high level if you're also briefing the board. So the spectrum is quite wide.
And we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about kind of some of those reporting lines and some of the what we feel like are the optimal places for a CISO to report in, and some things that maybe don't work as well based on our experience. But before we do that, I think one of the things that's really top of mind for everybody right now is first and foremost culture, and oftentimes how you are creating a security resilient engineering culture. And the way that we're talking about that is DevSecOps really today as a business and kind of as practitioners all here. I think most of us are at least trying to do some form of DevSecOps. But super curious to hear from each of you, just in your one-liner, how would you define DevSecOps when we talk about it for your business and obviously for Datadog?
I think the one word actually I would describe it to be is very collaborative, because we're embedding security right into this development cycle, but being collaborative with other members of engineering, right? Platform engineering is who we closely partner with at our organization, working aside with them, but having like an open discussion and conversation with them, and thinking about new ideas of what process do we want to implement, what can scale appropriately for our organization. So collaboration definitely offers that, and everyone comes with really great ideas. A big tenet we adhere to, at least at our organization, is assuming positive intent.
Mm-hmm.
And when we come to the conversations with these ideas, particularly in that topic of DevSecOps, it's really wonderful to see what you can really do and move the needle along. So, yeah.
I think for me, just giving it to the one-word definition, besides collaboration, I would say context. For us, we believe internally security is a community, so it's decentralized across multiple teams. And our job is to we also have security engineers in security, right? But it's to give technically the engineers who own and build all the features and products that you all use, that end-to-end ownership of those systems, the context that they need to have in order to know how secure it is, what the expectations are within the guardrails that we've established. Because they know their systems better than we will ever know them. And it's very difficult for us to say, hey, you need to do this in an architecture that we don't fully understand unless we work on it every day. So context, I think, comes to mind when we talk about DevSecOps.
So with that context, of course, we're approaching this at the leadership level. We have the practitioners panel tomorrow. So as leaders, what would you say is really critical for working with your engineering partners and defining what it means when we say we're putting security at different phases in the software development lifecycle? So like, how do you partner? And then what indicators do you look for to say, this is really working for us?
You want to go first?
Sure. Well, first of all, I think the collaboration that was brought up already is a first, right? Like I'm a believer of starting with the why. And it can't be because the policy says so. I don't believe in like drafting a policy and then expecting everyone to comply with it. That's not how we do security. It's more about what is actually proper engineering practices, what is proper security practices. Of course, like what do we think our customers are going to ask of us, or what they're expecting out of a company like Datadog. But then it's the why. Like, why are we doing this? Why does it make sense? And then obviously, we don't try in a top-down approach of things where we just do it and ignore any feedback. We collect feedback. When we implement a new control, we usually test it within controlled exposure of that control. So say we start with a team. Well, first of all, we start with my own org. Say we want to implement a different method of two-factor authentication. We test it ourselves first. If it works for us, then we expand it. If it works for other teams, then we continue to expand, and then we deploy it to the whole company. Same thing on the engineering side. Say we're adding a new scanner, a new security control in the SDLC. We partner with teams that work closer with us, and then we deploy it. And then on top of that, communication and transparency, I think, is key. Why are we doing it? When are we doing it? What does it mean to you? If it doesn't work, where you can reach out to, what are the FAQs and things like that.
And I think for myself, what we really found to be successful is that each team in engineering, we created a team charter. And within that team charter, teams had their principles or tenets of what they want their teams to be and act like. For information security, one of the tenets are acting with transparency, right? So it's everything that you just mentioned, but I'm emphasizing on transparency. We want the organization to know what we're doing, right? What do we care about? And we thought, and I found this to be very successful, is explaining the why, like you said, but also providing those examples, right? This is going to help because of this.
Right.
So it's been successful for us. And there are just different areas that we focus on, like threat modeling, static code analysis, dynamic code analysis, pen testing, all of that, which are really embedding, right? And for us, it's our app, our betting and gaming app. So we are making sure we're building trust with the customers, and it all starts from the beginning and explaining the why.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, is being very, very transparent often prevents people from completely disconnecting as you're rolling out maybe what might be a cumbersome strategy or something that adds another step to what is already a long process to do something like, let's say, get a release out.
I would also say that we're always open to feedback. So at any point when we explain the why, we welcome the feedback, and if there are other ways of doing it, then we open that. So it goes back to that collaboration point.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
also, sorry, one thing I want to add is like one thing that I instill in my teams too, and is that sense of ownership. Like security should be equally responsible and own that release going out, because that's what makes a business tick, or what we think we want to do. Like customers are asking for it. We're not just here to find the bad stuff and then push it over the wall and expect teams to fix it at some point. It's like we're equally responsible for not finding it, but also make sure that they get a fix as well.
Yeah, I would ask the question as well, how much of your work is more looking for early indicators and being data informed about what's not working versus being data driven about a strategy? When you have enough negative indicators that you know you need to rethink a big part of a new security strategy you're rolling out?
Yeah, I think a big driver of that is risk and identifying those risks. But for us, it's striking that balance, right? So knowing what those risks are, collecting it, aggregating it, and then making an informed decision on it, right? So when we do have, let's say, vulnerabilities, application security vulnerabilities, um, there is a dashboard that we follow and we visit weekly. My CTO can tell you that. And he follows that closely along with the engineering organization. And we can see the trend, right? Is it working? Is this process working? Do we have the appropriate SLAs? Are the teams allocating a percentage of their time fixing these issues? And I will say that with the support of the executive team and the engineering team, we do have security prioritized, right? That we are identifying those issues early and we're able to remediate before it gets released, right? Or when it does get released, that it's the trust of the app.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I like about this question is the one big elephant in the CISO community right now is the whole SEC, right? Like we're probably all read it in the news where some of the reasons why they're going after certain companies is the fact that they knew of some deficiencies internally and they actually publicly did not disclose any of them. That I worry about those kind of things because it leads to a reaction of like, well, then we're going to create a culture where nobody says anything about the security of the company. So that way we can't be told eventually like, aha, 5 years ago you knew of this thing. I actually disagree with that approach. I think for us, it's more about let's continue to be more transparent, and it's incumbent, talking about like security leadership, is incumbent on me, our CTO, and our leadership to say, we'll take a response to every risk that we identify, whether it's this is not a priority, this can wait, this needs to be fixed now, so that people feel like they're empowered to say things and protected at the same time. But I will finish with the other thing, the right side of security is when you don't prevent everything and something happens, is don't let a good incident go to waste. That's something that we say internally quite a bit, is strike when the iron is hot.
Yeah, so I think for execs in general, sometimes as an engineer, it can feel like executives are a long ways away. So I would ask both of you, what would you say to the engineers in the room? And you kind of touched on this a little bit about, sort of sweeping the security stuff under the rug. What do you say about approaching your CISO or senior leaders that are accountable for security? And maybe as a follow-up to that, how do you make yourself approachable as a CISO?
That's a great question. So I think guidance and advice that I would have to say is think like a security hacker. I know that's interesting advice, but I would say that you want to think about the scenarios of what are the risks, what could go wrong. And that helps you understand what security is faced with on a day-to-day, is assessing those risks. So I would say think about security from a different lens. And to answer that second part of that question, wait, can you repeat the second part? Sorry.
Yeah, how do you make yourself approachable? Do you have a personal strategy that that you use with your engineering teams in particular, the way that you kind of present to the business?
Yeah. So the people who don't know me, I'm very high energy. So in meetings, when I talk to people, I go up and say hi to everyone at the organization over Slack, whatever you may be at. But I'm active on Slack. I, I, I think I just do a good job of exuding that personality that anyone on the security team is approachable and you can ask all the silly questions. So that helps. But with other senior leaders like the executives, just making an environment of they can ask any question that they want, and you're able to give a very short, concise answer of this is the risk, this is what we should do.
Yeah, similar feedback or answer. Like I always say, I would rather deal with 1,000 false positives than the one true one that wasn't reported. So since the majority of the audience here is in engineering, not security, feel free to go to your security team with everything that you think looks suspicious, and it's incumbent upon them to respond to it. If that becomes a pain to them, then that's a different conversation internally. But for us is when we get asked by engineers saying like, hey, this may be nothing, or say they report something ends up being a false positive and they start apologizing. I'm one of the first ones in Slack that always says like, hey, I would rather deal with 1,000 of these than the one that you feel afraid to tell us about, that ended up being the thing that we should have been worried about. And then on top of that, not every security event needs to be an incident. It needs to be behind closed doors with legal and all of that. So I always encourage security teams for like the operational things. Say a new vulnerability drops and the security team is trying to figure out, okay, how do I patch dirty pipe across all my Linux kernel hosts? Is open those incidents up internally, have the engineering team join them because they will share the context that, again, the security team doesn't have. And the solution might be more obvious or more present than the security team believes.
And I'm going to add one more thing. I think a lot of engineering teams or others outside of engineering think that security is a blocker. It's really not. It's an enabler to the business. So making sure that when there is a request or an idea, get rid of the mindset that security is going to say no. It's not that. Security wants to enable the business. So, but also add that to advice given.
I mean, obviously, we're all really focused on creating safe spaces inside of our engineering cultures for people to report, comment, and also be willing to just raise their hand and say, I'd like to learn. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a huge opportunity for all of us as well. If you don't have programs for that internally today, those are largely driven from the top down by leadership.
Right.
So moving on here to a non-culture topic, and one that we frequently get in panels like this. I'm going to hit you with a little bit of a curveball here. How many people, just curious, don't have a CISO in their business today? Almost no one. That's never happened before in one of these panels. But one of the primary questions that we get is, when do I know that my startup or my company is ready for this role? And curious to hear from each of you, what are the clear indicators? Is it day zero?
So I feel as I've been a part of the coin on both sides. So one is been a part of a startup where there was an existing product and there were customers, right? So very much needed a CISO there, but it was heavily regulated. So there were regulations that we had to adhere to, but they were very early on, right? They they went through Series C, right, in raising. So um, I would say it was very early on, but still probably like 3 years old at that point. And then on the other side, not launching a product, right, but building, right. So was heavily involved from that end. So I would say if you have an app or if you're a provider or you have customers, you definitely need a CISO then, right? I would say early on is probably better because then you are moving towards this proactive security versus it being on the reactive end of it. So my preference and I would say is very much early on, even if it is you don't have any customers and you're still raising. You still need to build security in very early on.
Yeah. Actually, this is going to be interesting. I think I agree with 60%. Well, I do think, so I get asked by founders this question a lot, and I do think there is a risk of hiring too early, where if you don't have a product, there's nothing to protect at that point, right? If your company's survival is in building a product and getting that first customer to give you money, otherwise you got to close shop and everyone goes home, security doesn't matter too much at that point. But it depends also on what you're building. If you're building a security product, then I think it gives you more credibility to have a CISO early on, because then that CISO can unlock some doors or open some doors for you as potential customers. If you're building, say, an infrastructure monitoring product, I think the moment that you start having customers trying to understand a little bit deeper about what your security program is and what your, then you should use that as signal to then hire a CISO who can then have those conversations. But you're right, if I'm starting a security company, then having a CISO early on, it makes sense. But if I'm having a CISO who's telling me like, hey, you need to have SDLC scanning when we don't even are making $1 of revenue, that can be a little challenging.
Yeah, for me, I think it really comes down to data risk. And I think we're going to really see this on the AI, LLM side of things, right, as people are just creating these pipelines that have massive amounts of access to data. It's going to depend largely on what your reputational risk is from a single incident. Is that going to end the company before you have that customer zero?
Right.
So is that a place that either of you think these fractional execs or virtual CISOs, part-time CISOs are effective?
I'm sure. I think the fractional CISO or virtual CISO will probably make sense for a company that needs to have, hey, we have some data security concerns. Say you're building a health tech company where even landing that first customer will be a challenge if you just went through a breach. That might be a better use of money at that point versus having somebody on payroll. But it's interesting. There is actually a fractional CTO as well. So I'm actually curious how that applies for a technical company, if that's even a thing. So that's why I think it's like it depends on the industry and, to your point, what data you have, whether AI, health tech, like I mentioned, finance, fintech. These are companies where maybe having security early on makes more sense.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that. And I do think in some cases it's actually effective to have a virtual CISO, but it's case by case, right? If, to your point, if you're raising money and you need someone to describe or give you like a blueprint of what an information security program should look like, in those cases it is effective, right?
Yeah.
And then it really depends on per engagement too, right? I've seen very much that they're involved in the beginning and then they kind of fade away and they're not needed. So it's just very case by case basis.
And so obviously you can't have 100% fractional executives. You can't have fractional CTO, fractional CISO, fractional CEO.
You get 1/8 of each, and there you go. Yeah.
Executive overemployment. Speaking of team structure, though, we just did something new at Datadog, and I'm curious to hear from Emilio on a big move that we just made, which is that we consolidated our SRE team under security. And how's that going? And curious what you think about that consolidation as well.
I wonder if this is going to be part of the practitioner session tomorrow. So I think Bianca, if you're here. So one thing that we did recently, like Andrew mentioned, is SRE now reports under security engineering, which is the technical security side in my organization. There are a couple of reasons for it. Is at the end of the day, we're both a risk management function, right? From different lenses. SRE cares about the reliability of the platform, the product readiness. They also own this incident management process of the company for reliability issues. Security obviously cares about security risk, and then security had its own separate incident management process that now we've combined into a single one. At the end of the day, these functions are really trying to test the really where the boundaries of our platform is and our risk tolerance. So it made a lot of sense. So imagine, and it's still a work in progress. So how it's going, I think it's going really well. I'm sure we'll hear more about it in the practitioner session tomorrow. But it's going really well. I think the alignment is there. For those of you who do SRE and think about like chaos engineering and things like that, it's not really that different from doing pen testing or red teaming. You're just trying to stress test the systems in different ways. But at the end of the day, you're looking for like what are the limits of the system from a security standpoint or from a reliability standpoint. So those two functions aligned make a lot of sense. You're looking at vulnerabilities as part of like what vulnerability budget do we have, right? To your point of which ones do we prioritize, how do we fix, how do we track as part of like reliability and quality issues on the product. So that also makes a lot of sense. So it's interesting. I don't know if it's new. I actually haven't heard many people say it, but it's starting to become more and more where reliability, resiliency being one function is more of the talking point. So we figure we will give it a shot, and I think it's working well.
It's definitely interesting. One that I haven't had the opportunity to actually manage myself at other organizations. The way we do it here at Fanatics, platform engineering or SRE, that function sits under quality engineering. And quality engineering, very much similar to information security, right? Load testing, bugs, vulnerabilities. It depends on like the quality at the end of the day, right? What you are shipping to, what our product is at the end of the day, and how our customers are viewing it. So I actually think in our organization, it works really well that it's not a part of security, even though we do care about the same things, right? We have the common goals. But having that separation is also a great thing because we're able to scale and really drive that collaboration with one another. So I like that collaboration. I like the separation. I do see that overlap, but right now at our organization, it really works the way it does, and it works well.
So this wasn't your way of getting more headcount, since the CTO is right there, right?
He's like looking at me right there.
But it works depending on the system, right? So like one thing that we do internally a lot, which I believe we're very public about, are game days, right? Which is how we simulate an outage, similar to a tabletop exercise from a security standpoint. Right? So there are a lot of similarities. So it just matters depending on the organization how that works.
Yeah.
And obviously, I think the biggest benefit is not dissimilar to what we call purple teaming in security, which is that having all those metrics go into a single leader really shortens the feedback loops.
Right.
So obviously, both of you are in regulated industries. Datadog is in a lot of industries, and obviously, you are in a heavily regulated industry as well. And there are a lot of must-dos. We're all saddled with like compliance. How would you say you balance compliance versus the necessary innovation in your security organization to roll out new features or new process or practice or tools?
Yeah, so it's tough. So for those who are not familiar with the betting and gaming space, betting and gaming is legalized in only a handful of states. That's one. But two, each jurisdiction has different requirements. They're not all the same. So you have that, right? And then the third part here is we are a growing business, and particularly Fanatics. We're not the first people to enter the market, right? So for us, it's a lot of how can we launch and get our app into the hands of all of these customers, right? But a big part of that is this compliance aspect, right? You have to adhere to these requirements. You have to get certified in order to launch within those states. But for us, it's that balance, right? We know we want to launch, we want to be active, and really drive that innovation. And for us, we are always thinking of ways, right? Especially with our release cycle, right? We're constantly innovating. We want to innovate faster. So building that relationship with the regulators has been really helpful. And we have an entire compliance team that is heavily involved. But engineering has that collaboration with our compliance team. And we're always thinking of ideas of how do we innovate faster. And whatnot. So I would say it's tough, very much not compliance driven, because I do want to make that distinction that information security is always going to be very risk based. However, in this industry specifically, we have to have a good, healthy balance.
Yeah, yeah. It's I would say it's not a dichotomy because but it's an interesting balance to maintain, like you mentioned. Because like for us, for example, like Andrew mentioned, we have to comply with the industry that our customers are in. I learned that every month I learn of a new industry that has its own compliance standard that they're asking us to comply with. And our field team obviously like makes the use cases for why we need to comply with X, Y, and Z. And I wish that at some point somebody will say, you know what, this standard is the one true standard to be, like Lord of the Rings, the One Ring. But that's not the world we live in. The challenge internally is it's very easy for security to say, well, we have to do this because of compliance, right? Because there's money behind it. The sales team is giving us a market forecast of how much money or revenue that will bring and all of that. I'm a believer that good security begets compliance. And instead of compliance drive security, but it's tough, right? Because sometimes good security practices take time because you have to restructure or re-architect a whole system. Whereas I go, well, if I add these controls and I check these boxes, boom, voila, we have the compliance that we need. So we really have to balance like what is the time to market that we need versus, and then have a roadmap for what are the if we don't have it yet, what are the good engineering practices that we need to build that would then beget that compliance level. So I always push the teams. In one example, there was a communication that went out recently internally about doing something for compliance, and my feedback was we just have to do it because it's good engineering practice, and we should just communicate it that way. Because using the compliance as a crutch is very easy, but we have to do it. We have to meet the customer's needs. So it's a tricky internal balance for sure.
So with that, we're almost to our Q&A portion. So I'd encourage all of you, if you have questions that you always have wanted to ask a CISO and we're just afraid to ask, we have aisle mics. We probably have time for 3 or 4 at the end of the session. What is a single piece of parting advice that you have for the audience on getting started thinking like a security exec?
I think I mentioned this earlier, but think of security and really think of us security people as an enabler to the business, right? And start thinking like that, right? Because there are common goals that all different functions of the business want to attain. So security is an enablement function, and if you think like that, there's never like a no. And I think getting that no out of your mind really helps. So yeah.
Yeah. I think I'll take a different angle on that one is expect security to be an enabler and have those conversations internally if it's not. But ideally, think of us or security as you have the same goal that we do, and let's just sit down and work together on this. Let's whiteboard things. Let's, threat modeling is a great exercise. So if you haven't tried threat modeling as an exercise with the security team, try it. A lot of lessons learned for both teams. There are really good practices that can be applied across. But expect your security team to be an enabler.
All right, well, thanks to both of you. A big round of applause for our guests. We are happy to take any audience questions.
So, I mean, you touched on this briefly, but we're at an observability conference. So curious to know what kinds of, not technical, but organizational observability mechanisms you employ as CISOs to help the rest of your peers on the C-suite and the executive level understand how well you're performing in security as a company.
Yeah, I mean, I will say that we have multiple areas that we're focusing in on for security engineering and the capabilities that we use at Datadog to help us tell that right story, right? It's telling that story to the executives or other members of engineering, but it's really how are we able to identify, right, those risks and vulnerabilities and whatever it may be very early on, and having that data right in front of you is going to help tell that story to the executives or engineering teams of, are we trending in the right direction, or are there areas of opportunity? So this has really allowed the information security team to really focus in on that to help us get where we need to be. And we could always be better. So I think reporting and allowing those capabilities to be enabled tells that story for us.
Yeah, I think one thing I will add is you also have to be open to the idea that what worked yesterday doesn't work for you today. So there may be some processes or some methods that you're using now that are just not scaling with your organization, your infrastructure, that's the amount of teams. So always be open to change those. I think vulnerability scanning and patching is probably the perfect example of that. You can have an environment that is too big to just scan and file tickets for. So work on with the engineering teams about like what automation can we deploy that would just take care of a huge class of problems. And then second to that, think about systemic risks rather than individual risks. Not everything is an individual risk. You can probably group some of these as a systemic thing, and then think about what can we do to just get rid of this whole class of problem to make it go away.
It looks like we've got one over here as well.
Yep. Hi, I'm Jazz from Peakvisor. I guess I'm a CTO now, but I grew up as a security engineer. So when I hear a exciting statement like, hey, SREs should report up to security now, I tend to look for vulnerabilities in that statement. I think defining security as risk management for the business is a really interesting idea. Makes sense. Compliance is risk management. Security vulnerabilities are risk management. There's other kinds of risk that a business faces too. Mm-hmm. If you don't buy the right kind of disaster relief at the right time, that's a problem. If you have not invested enough in physical security, that's a problem. Spicy question, should finance report up to security too?
It's a good one. So I think to clarify, I didn't say SRE should report to security as something that we're doing ourselves, and it works for us. The part of the reason why it works for us is because even on the security side, we hire software engineers. So we have a big software engineering community as part of engineering. Finance doesn't hire software engineers, so there's a huge discipline difference there. But finance and security should collaborate a lot on risk management. But no, it shouldn't report to security. Yeah.
Darn it.
Yeah.
All right, we have time for just this one, and then we're going to have to close it out.
Thanks for the insights and for the last question. So, as engineers, we like automating a whole bunch of things. For example, there's compliance things like SOC 2, ISO, which involves a lot of evidence collection, and we can automate that. So what I'm curious to hear from both of you is, what is your advice? Like, what are the things you would look to automate for the highest ROI?
Ooh, and the room fell silent.
I can take it. I think toil is a big thing to automate, to get rid of. And that's the biggest ROI that we look for when we automate, is what is the toil that we're trying to remove from people's day-to-day. So on the compliance side, for example, I have software engineers on the GRC side. that are automating the evidence collection, and it's actually a function that it's saved our GRC analysts from spending 40 plus hours gathering evidence down to like 5, right? Don't quote me in numbers. But that's what we're looking for, is removing the toil that shouldn't be there.
I need to pick your brain on that because that's
More headcount. See, Ian.
So it's a great question. I think we're still in that phase of making sure how do we automate those processes. Building the program, it's only been like 2 years, so we're getting into a good cadence of evidence collection, control testing, but automation we haven't really hit yet. But that is something that we're really going to be focusing on our top 5. Like, what do we care about to remove? So it's a great question.
All right, well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks again, everybody, for being here. And if you're interested in this topic, we'll see you tomorrow for the Future of DevSecOps panel.
There you go. Thank you.